Putin responds as Russia combats a cross-border Ukrainian onslaught. Following reports that Ukrainian forces are involved in violent action on Russian soil, Russian President Vladimir Putin described it as a large-scale provocation. Putin said at Wednesday's cabinet meeting that the Kyiv regime is conducting indiscriminate shooting from various types of weapons, including missiles, at civilian buildings, residential houses, and ambulances. Russia started a full-scale invasion of Ukraine more over 2 years ago, murdering hundreds of thousands of people. Exiled Russian forces allied with Kyiv have already staged cross-border operations into Russia, but this week's purported foray into Russia's Kursk area is among the greatest. It is also the first to seem to include regular Ukrainian soldiers, which has raised the most concern in the Kremlin. It's a significant blow to Putin's reputation, since he has attempted to shelter the Russian people from the effects of the conflict he started. Following my chat with the acting governor of the Kursk area, many civilian agencies have been directed to offer the required support to the region's population. I also request that the government take up this matter immediately, Putin added during the briefing. The first reports of a Ukrainian ground attack came on Tuesday from the acting governor of the Kursk region, Alexei Smirnov, who wrote on Telegram about attempted border breakthroughs in the Sudzansky and Koronevsky districts, later claiming that Ukrainians had attacked Russian border forces units in the settlements of Nikolaevo Deriino and Oleshnya. Smirnov further said that several thousand people had been evacuated from the conflict, while Russian police reported 5 civilians dead and 24 wounded. On Wednesday, the Russian Defense Ministry said that battle between Russian and Ukrainian forces was still taking place in the Kursk region, near the Russian-Ukrainian border. According to the Izvestia Daily, Valery Gerasimov, the chief of general staff of the Russian army, informed Putin on Wednesday that Ukrainian soldiers would be forced back to the border. He said that the assault comprised 1,000 Ukrainian forces, with 100 dead and 215 wounded. Ukrainian forces are doomed, Major General Opty Yalatinov, a deputy leader of the Russian Armed Troops Major Military Political Department, told the official TASS news agency. Several news sites reported on the fighting, although Kyiv has yet to comment on developments inside Russia's borders. In recent weeks, Russian troops have made cautious but steady advances against Ukraine on the Eastern Front, as well as an operation aimed at Kharkiv, Ukraine's second city. Many of the supply lines supporting that attack pass via the region where Ukrainian forces are reportedly battling inside Russia. Moscow may even be obliged to shift troops from other fronts to protect Russia itself. Ukraine's allies, headed by the United States, have expressed concern about Ukraine utilizing donated weaponry to attack targets in Russia. However, Kyiv intends to damage Russian bases and supplies inside Russia. Russia, by the way, has always believed that it can use its border regions with impunity for massive air and artillery attacks on sovereign territories of other countries, Ukrainian presidential advisor Mikhailo Podolyak wrote on X. Putin said the Ukrainian assault on Kursk is a massive provocation. Russian President Vladimir Putin said on Wednesday that a Ukrainian invasion into Russia's Kursk area constituted a grave provocation. The Kyiv regime has launched another major provocation, Putin warned Russian government officials after the Kursk incident. Putin accused Ukrainian soldiers of indiscriminate shelling of civilian targets in the Kursk area. Russia's Putin offers disaster assistance to North Korea to help deal with flood damage. Russian President Vladimir Putin has offered humanitarian aid to help North Korea deal with losses from recent floods, in another evidence of strengthening ties between the two countries. Russian President Vladimir Putin has given humanitarian assistance to North Korea in the aftermath of recent floods, according to both governments, and yet another indicator of the two countries' improving ties. In a letter to North Korean leader Kim Jong-un on Saturday, Putin extended deep sympathy and support and expressed a desire to give prompt disaster relief to assist North Korea in recovering from the floods, according to the North's official Korean Central News Agency. TASS, Russia's official news agency, said that Putin assured Kim in the message, "You can always count on our assistance and support." During a meeting in Pyongyang in June, Kim and Putin sign a pact stipulating mutual military assistance if either country is attacked, in what was considered the two countries' biggest defense deal since the end of the Cold War. Despite widespread outside belief that North Korea has provided Russia with conventional weapons for its war in Ukraine in exchange for military and economic assistance, relations between the two countries have improved significantly. Kim expressed gratitude to Putin for the offer of aid, saying he could deeply feel the special emotion towards a genuine friend in the most difficult period. However, Kim stated that North Korea has established its own rehabilitation plans and will seek Russian assistance later if necessary, according to KCNA. On July 27, heavy rains in North Korea's northwestern region flooded 4,100 houses, 7,410 acres of agricultural fields, and numerous other public buildings, roads, and railways, according to KCNA. The scale of casualties is unknown. Kim recently told KCNA that the flood caused a casualty that cannot be allowed, but did not elaborate. On Thursday, rival South Korea also offered humanitarian aid to North Korea. North Korea is expected to ignore or reject the South Korean offering, as tensions between the two nations are at an all-time high. During a Friday visit to a military unit involved in operations to evacuate residents stranded by the floods, Kim called South Korea scum and lambasted rubbish South Korean media for allegedly tarnishing the North's image by exaggerating the death tolls from the floods. Kim made no mention of South Korea's offer to provide aid. Russian President Vladimir Putin has given humanitarian assistance to North Korea in the aftermath of recent floods, according to both governments, in yet another indicator of the two countries' improving ties. In a letter to North Korean leader Kim Jong-un on Saturday, Putin extended deep sympathy and support and expressed a desire to give prompt disaster relief to assist North Korea in recovering from the floods, according to the North's official Korean Central News Agency. TASS, Russia's official news agency, said that Putin assured Kim in the message, "You can always count on our assistance and support." Ties between North Korea and Russia have improved dramatically, despite widespread speculation that North Korea sent conventional weaponry to Russia for its conflict in Ukraine in exchange for military and economic support. During a visit in Pyongyang in June, Kim and Putin inked a commitment requiring reciprocal military support if either country is attacked, in what was seen as the two countries' largest defense agreement since the Cold War ended. Kim expressed gratitude to Putin for the offer of aid, saying he could deeply feel the special emotion towards a genuine friend in the most difficult period. However, Kim stated that North Korea has established its own rehabilitation plans and will seek Russian assistance later if necessary, according to KCNA. According to KCNA, heavy rains in North Korea's northwest area on July 27 inundated 4,100 dwellings, 7,410 acres of agricultural fields, and countless other public structures, roads, and railroads. The number of victims is unknown. KCNA recently paraphrased Kim as stating the flood resulted in a casualty that cannot be tolerated, but did not clarify. On Thursday, rival South Korea also offered North Korea humanitarian assistance. According to observers, North Korea would most likely ignore or reject the South Korean request, since tensions between the two nations are at an all-time high. During a Friday visit to a military unit participating in efforts to rescue civilians trapped by the floods, Kim referred to South Korea as scum and chastised what he termed rubbish South Korean media for supposedly ruining the North's image by inflating the number of deaths from the floods. Kim made no mention of South Korea's willingness to give help. The exchange took place because Putin is a KGB man, an FSB man, Mr. Orlov said in a phone conversation 4 days after two private aircraft bringing him and other freed detainees arrived in Cologne, Germany. Mr. Orlov is well versed in espionage, having spent decades researching the atrocities of the Soviet secret police as a co-founder of the Memorial Human Rights Organization, which won the Nobel Peace Prize in 2022. Mr. Putin was a KGB agent in Dresden, East Germany, in the 1980s and led the FSB, its domestic intelligence successor agency, in the 1990s. Mr. Orlov told the Russian leader that displaying allegiance to the FSB and other Russian intelligence agencies by freeing their operatives outweighed the political danger of releasing opposition leaders labeled as traitors by the Kremlin. Last Thursday's seven-country exchange, as well as the hero's welcome that returning Russians got in Moscow, including a red carpet reception for Mr. Putin, highlighted Mr. Putin's security-focused state. It also underlined the deal-making aspect of his leadership style, which seems to have persisted despite the increased tensions with the West as a result of the Ukraine conflict. The lead topic on one of Russia's state television prime-time newscasts on Monday demonstrated how important the KGB's legacy has become to the Kremlin's rhetoric about patriotism and national identity. It was an exclusive interview with two of last week's liberated spies, sent to Slovenia by another of the Soviet espionage agency's modern-day descendants, the SVR Foreign Intelligence Service. Anna Dulceva and Artem Dulcev impersonated an Argentine couple so well in Slovenia that they even spoke Spanish to their children at home. In the interview, Mr. Dulcev explained in halting Russian, he had scarcely spoken the language in his years undercover, how a fellow SVR agent paid him a visit in a Slovenian prison and sent Mr. Putin's pleasantries. I reviewed restaurants for 12 years. They have changed, but not for the better. Live, laugh, lowboy, fine dining's love story with inspirational quotes. Life and death of a political meme. He said that Vladimir Vladimirovich and the SVR are doing everything possible for our release, Mr. Dulcev recounted, using the Russian president's patronymic. Spies like the Dulcevs give their whole life to serving the motherland and make sacrifices that a normal person wouldn't understand, according to a state television reporter. For example, they brought up their children as Spanish-speaking Catholics. Now they'll have to learn about borscht and a new year. According to Dmitry S. Peskov, the Kremlin spokesperson, the Dulcev son and daughter discovered their Russian heritage aboard the aircraft to Moscow after Thursday's transfer. He also stated that Vadim Krasikov, who was convicted of murdering a Chechen rebel fighter in a Berlin park in 2019 and freed last week, was a member of the FSB internal intelligence organization with intimate ties to Vladimir Putin. But, in addition to applauding Russia's spies' supposed patriotism and sacrifice, the Kremlin's rhetoric since last Thursday has included another element. Proper spycraft entails forging bargains with your adversaries. Of course, in Mr. Putin's Russia, such arrangements may be predicated on what many in the West see as hostage-taking of individuals such as Evan Gershkovich, the Wall Street Journal writer freed as part of last week's agreement. This was a very tough chess game, played according to the best textbooks, lasting a tediously long time, wrote Dmitry Medvedev, the deputy chairman of Mr. Putin's Security Council and one of the most hawkish members of his entourage, after the exchange. Western diplomats participating in the conversations say the Kremlin insisted on the talks taking place between espionage agencies rather than via diplomatic channels. The CIA spearheaded the discussions for the United States, and Western officials say Mr. Putin leaned heavily on the FSB, which he seems to trust the most, despite the fact that its internal intelligence job makes it more of a parallel to the FBI. While Western officials have portrayed talks with Russian diplomats in previous years as futile harangues, those engaged in the covert discussions with the FSB before to last week's transfer described them as focused and professional. The Kremlin sent a similar message. To be fair, said Medvedev, our Western friends also displayed the necessary pragmatism and a tendency toward reasonable compromises at a certain moment. The timing of the agreement, months before an American election and the end of President Biden's tenure, underlined both parties' urgency to reach an agreement. According to a Kremlin insider who was engaged in some of the negotiations, the mentality in Moscow was to strike while the iron is hot and clinch a deal while there was one to be obtained. He spoke on the condition of anonymity because he was not allowed to discuss the talks publicly. According to some Kremlin observers, Mr. Putin regards former President Donald J. Trump as a volatile and difficult negotiator. And, given Mr. Trump's strained ties with Germany, the Kremlin may have questioned if he could persuade Berlin to hand up Mr. Krasikov, the key of the deal, according to Alexander Bonov, a senior fellow at the Carnegie Russia Eurasia Center. Mr. Putin's enthusiasm in negotiating deals in the exchange prompted some observers to believe that a similar strategy of covert discussions between espionage agencies may result in a ceasefire in Ukraine. Despite their ongoing conflict, Russia and Ukraine have frequently arranged prisoner-of-war exchanges, including at least 3 swaps that released 520 inmates between May and July. Western officials engaged in the negotiations downplayed this prospect. They said that last week's prisoner exchange was the result of a rare alignment of interests among Washington, Berlin, and Moscow. When it comes to Ukraine, they say the two sides are considerably farther apart. However, participants in the discussions did not roll out future arrangements, at least to swap additional detainees. Mr. Orlov, the human rights activist, said that he and other political prisoners released last week were scheming about how to liberate more of their friends before they even arrived in Germany. Ilya Yashin, a prominent opposition leader whom Mr. Putin freed, said in a YouTube video on Sunday that engaging with Mr. Putin in prisoner swap discussions would only encourage him to take more aggressive steps. But, he said, there should be no illusions. Regardless of how the West acts, Mr. Putin will not play by its rules. All dictators take hostages and torture them publicly, getting some advantage for themselves, according to him. There is no way for opponents of dictators to act that would exclude this.